I'm Lori Grant, Managing Editor of Transport Topics, and welcome to our latest installment of Transport Topics Live on Web. Today, we're going to peer into 2015 for a bit to get a sense of what the new year holds on both the business front and government regulations. We'll also look back at the year that was to highlight some of the issues that grip the trucking industry. I'm joined by senior business writer Rip Watson, who will tell us about freight demand, the driver shortage, mergers, and the impact of lower fuel prices and more. Also joining us is Eugene Mulero. He covers congressional and governmental affairs for Transport Topics, as does Rip. He'll walk us through what to expect from lawmakers when the U.S. Congress reconvenes in January, now that the government has fresh funding of $1 trillion, and where things stand with highway funding and, of course, the hours of service rule. We welcome your interaction as well. Send your questions or comments via email to share@ttnews.com, or you can send a tweet to hashtag LiveOnWeb2015, or you can comment directly on this article page in the box at the top of the container. Let's get started. Rip, I'll start with you. The trucking industry is poised to head into the new year with a great deal of demand. Can you tell us what's behind it and what the industry plans in order to meet that demand?
Yeah, thanks, Lori. What we're looking at here is a very, very strong end to 2014. GDP was at the strongest level in 11 years during the second and third quarter. There's pretty widespread view that in 2015 there's going to be something on the order of 3% growth in the U.S. That makes for a really good situation for the industry. Before I get into the 2015 view, I think I just want to mention one thing. There's a gentleman named Chad England, who is at CR England, who is fond of saying it's a good time to be a trucker, and for a change, that's definitely the case. As far as 2015 goes by segments, we've really got a pretty strong outlook in the dry van area, which is by far the largest area of trucking. So far in 2014, the less than truckload business has been really strong as well and could continue at some favorable pace. Flatbed has been down a little bit compared to the others, but with the potential increase in the housing market, which is widely expected, that's going to help flatbed quite a bit. The reefer business is very much up and down. Those of you who eat lots of produce in the summer, that all came in a truck, and that makes for a very busy season for them right now. The only other section I haven't talked about briefly is tank. The tank truck sector has been the main driving force for the ATA tonnage index, which is literally at record levels or near record levels. As far as 2015 goes, I don't want to get too far into fuel prices right now, Lori, but what we've got looking at this year in the energy sector is the impact of lower fuel prices, which we'll all be talking about later.
Well, fantastic. You know, what's interesting while we talk about all of this is capacity has also been such a big deal and also been one of the worries for the industry. Tell us a little bit about, you know, in light of everything you just said, tell us a little bit more about capacity and how, you know, all of this erupted for us this year.
Well, I think there's no question that there's capacity question. The capacity issue is totally tied to the driver situation, because if you don't have a driver, you're not going to be able to run your freight. There have been cases this year, earlier, where there have been fleets that have talked about having 7 or 8% of their trucks unseated because they can't find drivers. Right now, there is a feeling that the driver shortage is going to get worse. There are a lot of questions also about how many new trucks fleets are going to be buying. There's been a huge purchase surge at the end of the year, which so far has not shown any signs of abating. But if we don't have drivers, then there's not going to be as much of a reason to buy new trucks.
Well, then let's talk about the driver a little bit more, because there's a capacity issue there as well. What are companies doing to recruit Any idea why there is such a shortage? How will drivers get in trucks so that trucks can move all of these goods that are in demand?
Well, that's a fantastic question and one that we could spend the rest of the day on. But in short, what we're looking at here is an aging driver workforce, and we're looking at the conventional view that nobody wants their son or daughter to be a truck driver. I think that's going to have to change. There are some signs that it is. One of the shorter term issues that's being watched very carefully is driver pay. In the third quarter, the pace of fleets that raised driver pay just about quadrupled from the previous record. Some of those pay increases have been 12, 13, 14%. So essentially where we're going here is if you want to make a bit of a better living, one place you can do it is in a truck.
I'm sure the industry finds that encouraging. Let's hope there are people out there who also want to do that. Eugene, let's bring you in. President Obama signed a $1 trillion spending bill late last night. We're going to come back to what's in the bill for trucking. But first, what I want to talk about, or want you to talk about, is the Congress, which is now made up of a Republican House, while the Senate is led by the Democrats. But when everyone returns, it's going to be Republican-led in both chambers. So who are some of the new players that trucking should care about?
And yeah, thank you, Lori. And then for the trucking industry, the next Congress that is expected to start in mid-January, it looks like there's going to be some very lawmakers that have strong rapport with the trucking industry in positions of power. And they include Senator John Thune, who's going to be taking over the Senate Commerce Committee, which oversees trucking safety provisions. Then we have Senator Susan Collins, who has rapport with the trucking industry, and as many people know, she was a leader in getting the suspension of the restart rules. And she's going to be the chairman of a subcommittee that controls transportation funding in the Senate. And then we have Senator James Inhofe, who is a Republican of Oklahoma, and he's has conservative Republican ideals, but he's also a person who historically has been pro-freight, pro-transportation, and he has adamantly talked about expanding the transportation reach and transportation dollars to benefit the trucking sector, construction sector. And Senator Inhofe is going to be chairman of the EPW committee, and the Environment and Public Works Committee is responsible for being the main author of the next highway bill. And this is a bill that the trucking industry is looking to plug in a lot of provisions to. And over in the House, we have Congressman Bill Schuster, a Republican of Pennsylvania, who's still going to be chairman of the Transportation Committee. And Bill Schuster and his father, who used to be chairman of the committee before him, they have, again, rapport with the freight sector, the trucking sector, and we expect provisions, and he's going to work with Inhofe on getting a bill advanced in the next year, and he's expected to collaborate and advance this new highway bill next year that could have a strong impact on how the trucking industry operates.
The bill will expire in May, correct? The highway funding bill. Do we know any more yet about what what's needed to bolster it? Will it stay as it is, or things that didn't work this year that they might look to kick out, and replace next year? Anything like that?
Yes. I need to preface this with the thing to watch for in the 2015 Congress is that we're still going to see a lot of congressional gridlock. So even though, like you said, this highway bill expires in May, and there has to be a new highway law to reauthorize this one, and the trucking industry is looking to have lawmakers inject provisions in that reauthorization that will make either permanently the suspension of the HOS restart. Again, what we saw in the lame duck session is a prelude to what's going to happen in the next Congress: gridlock and not much progress getting any meaningful legislation, not just for transportation, but we're talking the whole spectrum at passing next year. So to go back to your question, I do know that the trucking sector wants to put in provisions to make permanent the suspension of the restart rule, FMCSA, and also funding. I know that the trucking industry wants to ensure that the bill writers do not put language in the bill that would authorize tolls and expand the use of tolling throughout the country. And that tolling issue is something that the Obama White House has proposed, allowing for tolling on existing interstates. So that's a few things of what to watch for, but again, the 2015, when Congress comes back next year, gridlock is pretty much what a lot of people are expecting from them.
Well, let's all hope you're wrong about that, but we have you here for your expertise, so I'm certain you're right. Once again, I want to remind our viewers, this is Live on Web, the edition of Transport Topics. I'm Managing Editor Lori Grant, and with me are my colleagues, Congressional Reporter Eugene Malero, that's who was just speaking, and also with us is Rip Watson, Senior Business Reporter. We welcome your participation. Please send us your questions or comments via email to share@ttnews.com, or you can send a tweet to #LiveOnWeb2015, or you can comment directly to this article page in the box at the top of the container. All right. So I understand there's a question here. So let me see who it's for. From Doug Wilkes. He wants to know, in 2014, a moderate growth in GDP strained supply chains across North America. Is there a GDP growth number that will cause supply chains to break? Rip, you want to take a stab at that one?
I'll try that. Before I answer it, I'm going to say that makes me think a little bit about those of you who remember Johnny Carson. This is kind of asking me to be Karnak the Magnificent, one of his favorite characters. It's a very tough question. There's certainly an upper level somewhere. Some people have suggested 4 or 5%, but I don't think anybody really knows for sure because we don't know yet just how much issue there is going to be in terms of finding drivers and trucks. I happen to believe that there is always a market that's going to work, and one way or another that freight's going to get moved. There's going to be dislocations, but one way or the other, goods are going to get to the market.
Okay. Well, we have another one as well. You were talking about the driver a little earlier. Alex wants to know, are trucking companies reaching out to high schools and colleges to recruit young drivers?
There's no question of that. The number of fleets that have opened their own driving schools has gone up very sharply in the last few years. At the same time, there are companies that are focusing on making deals with driving schools where they can get new graduates, and they are pulling those folks directly out of the schools before somebody else can get at them. There's also the question that there is a 21-year-old nationwide limit for interstate drivers, and that has absolutely made some fleets beside themselves because they would very much like to get those drivers before they find another career somewhere else in another industry.
Okay. I want to pivot here and talk a little bit about safety. The $1 trillion spending bill is now signed by the president, and it was packed with add-ons that really could not get through the Congress on their own. So one of the things in it is rolling back safety rules that were supposed to keep sleepy truckers from causing wrecks. The government's rules had effectively shortened the truckers' work week. So, Eugene, there was lots of wrangling over this issue of hours of service in the last Congress. First, tell us what hours of service is, and then tell us what it could bring in 2015.
Yes, the hours of service that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has proposed, and it has become regulation, just mandating and offering a requisite on how much time the truckers can spend on the roads. So it's just regulating the work week for a truck driver,
okay.
To put it plainly. And the concern has been that from the trucking perspective, is that since a new set of rules went into effect in the summer of 2013, they put more limitations on the amount of time that drivers can be on the road, and the trucking industry and the trucking sector writ large have been opposed to these certain limits. And if I can just tell you what has happened, President Obama signed a bill last night, this omnibus funding bill, that includes a provision to suspend parts of this new hours of service regulation. And I want to just make sure for our people that we get the language right, that now this is into effect, the suspension of this part of the hours of service rule, and essentially drivers will be permitted to start their weekly work weeks by taking a 34-hour restart, but not accounting for the back-to-back 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. requirement.
They can do that immediately, or once starting in January? When does
No.
is this bill? This bill is
Now,
law right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
As soon as the law went into effect, which was last night, this suspension of the new restart rules.
Immediate.
Yeah,
Okay.
the 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. back-to-back requirements, which a lot of people in the trucking sector are familiar with, this went into effect immediately. And also, FMCSA, the agency, they have to, within 90 days, begin and craft a study of the new hours of service rules. And they have to present this study to Congress. And this law, they have till September 30th, 2015, when the law expires, because this is part of a funding bill. And the trucking sector, the one thing to watch out for is that we're waiting for the suppliers of logging devices have to now redo some of their software to accommodate for this new law. And also, I just got a statement from the agency, FMCSA, and they're telling us exclusively, Transport Topics, and this is something we're going to have on ttnews.com this week, that FMCSA is preparing to put a notice in the Federal Register, and they're going to have advice to the public on what the restart restrictions are required by law. And also FMCSA says, quote, that they're working to ensure that the 12,000 state and federal motor carrier enforcement personnel are prepared to revert back to the previous restart. So there's going to be guidance from FMCSA and the Federal Register coming soon. And then, as I said before, the trucking sector is looking to make these suspensions permanently.
Well, thanks for breaking news. Rip, I got to ask you then, in light of this being effective immediately, you know, a lot of what happened is a result of the trucking industry fighting back and deciding, you know, they were just quite resentful of being told when they could be behind the wheel. But, you know, right in the middle of all of the push and pull between the industry and the government was this deadly accident. So can you tell us what happened and what the implications for, you know, the trucking business is with hours of service, you know, just in general?
Yeah, absolutely, Lori. We need to go back 6 months to early morning, 1 a.m. on the New Jersey Turnpike when a Walmart truck collided with a van that had comedian Tracy Morgan and his party. They were coming back from an engagement in Delaware. Unfortunately, one of the occupants of the van passed away. Because of Mr. Morgan's celebrity, this became an immediate national event that put a spotlight on trucking safety. It's perhaps a little ironic that after this accident, the trucking industry got very much what it was looking for. But we need to take a very broad look at this. We need to remember that over 20 years, trucking safety has improved measurably. And it's very important not to forget that. And it's very important not to focus on just one incident as an indicator of trucking safety. That's just the bottom line. One of the things that's interesting about this accident, though, is that this driver of the Walmart truck was within a few minutes of the end of his 14-hour on-duty time. And that has definitely made quite a focus on the whole question of just how productive companies are making their drivers. Now, the thing that we need to remember here is that the industry, when this debate was beginning, was suggesting that 2 to 3% of productivity was removed by the restart rules that no longer are in place. So that would suggest, at least to some people, that there could be a 2 to 3% boost in productivity that could make life easier for shippers and carriers in terms of matching the growing demand with supply of equipment and drivers.
Well, you know, one of the things that truckers wanted to really push back on was when they could be behind the wheel. So part of their argument was, well, late at night, there are fewer commuters on the road. We can travel safer. Drivers get to drive when they want to. They're a lot fresher. I'm wondering, you know, whether the push and pull that we saw in the Congress of when to put people behind the wheel, whether that really pushed against the trucking industry's argument of all of this anyway, because the accident did happen. I realize it's one of, you know, just one out of thousands of loads getting where they needed to go very safely. But I do wonder whether there's any merit to that at all, this argument of, you know, trying to make drivers drive in daytime, thinking they'll be more refreshed, when actually, you know, they say no at night when there are fewer commuters. But this accident did happen at night. Is that at all, you know, an issue, or just a theory that's hanging out there?
I think there's still a very large lack of hard data on this. One of the reasons that there's going to be a study of this subject is to get to questions like that. I think, and just common sense tells you that if I'm a truck driver, I don't want to be stuck in commuter hours and spend hours, get stuck in a traffic jam someplace that I might be able to avoid if I'm working in the middle of the night. I think ultimately we're going to have to perhaps study this a little further, and we'll just find out a little bit more with experience.
And this study that FMCSA is required to do is going to compare, you know, how the new restart worked with the old, the previous restart provisions. So this is an extensive study that FMCSA is required to do, and FMCSA's leadership, while they strongly defend the 2013 restart rules, they have acknowledged that more information is needed in certain areas.
Well, and you know, even on the congressional front, I don't get the sense we've heard the last of this, because many lawmakers are vowing that they're going to take this up again. Cory Booker is one of them, the senator from New Jersey.
Yes.
And the accident happened in his state.
Correct.
So, you know, how soon, given all of the things that we've talked about so far, how soon do you think, when everyone reconvenes in January, this issue will be front and center again for the U.S. Congress?
Well, it's worth noting Senator Booker is a Democrat, and most of the opponents of this of suspending the HOS, the restart provision, are Democrats. His colleague, Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, he's Democrat, and Senator Blumenthal has announced that in the next Congress, he's going to continue to propose legislation and work with colleagues to undo the suspension. However, the way Congress works is that if you're in the majority, you get to control what bills get on the floor and manage and what amendments are proposed. So Senator Blumenthal and Senator Booker, being Democrats, going into the 114th Congress, they don't have the leverage that they can inject their legislative language in a major bill as an amendment, because the Republican leaders will be the ones controlling that. So it's going to be very difficult for them to advance that. Nevertheless, I expect they can have press conferences, they can send out releases, it will get some traction, and yes, both senators are going to continue. And if there is, God forbid, another major accident, that again does give them some ammunition to revisit their issue.
Well, it seems like we have the promise of lots of Capitol Hill drama. So
of course, yeah.
We should all stay tuned. I just want to remind our viewers that this is Live on Web by Transport Topics. Congressional reporter Eugene Milaro and senior business reporter Rip Watson are previewing key trucking issues of 2015 and reviewing those that dominated 2014. I'm managing editor Lori Grant, and a reminder that you can interact with us as well. You can email share@ttnews.com, or you can tweet #LiveOnWeb2015, or you can comment directly on this page in the box at the top of this container. Let me see if we've got any more questions from our viewers. And any more? All right, please keep our questions. Oh, yes, we do. We have from Gordon Klemp, CEO of National Transportation Institute. What price would federal, state, and local fuel taxes have to rise to in cents per gallon to meet our current need to update our highway system for current demand levels? Anybody want to give a shot?
If you want to, Rip.
I'll take a quick stab at that, but and then give way to Eugene. Basically, right now with the fuel taxes, including federal and state, hovering around 50 cents a gallon for both gasoline and diesel, one's a little below, one's a little bit above, there has been some talk that the process could need to double in terms of the actual cents per gallon in order to meet some of the needs of bringing the highways and bridges up to a state of good repair. Now, having said that, I have to tell you, there's more than one view of this in Washington, and Eugene is our expert. Take it away. And there's several transportation groups, and this gas price debate has been going on for many years. The last time the federal gas tax was increased was 1993. For our viewers, 18.4 is the gas tax, the federal gas tax. Diesel is at 24.4. Some groups say we need to double that just to bring the country's infrastructure in a state of good repair and to maintain it. And if we were to modernize it, we need even more money. And it's worth noting that the American Society of Civil Engineers has said that our country gave our country's infrastructure a grade of D+, which was actually an upgrade. They previously gave them a D and a D-. So a lot of our truckers know that our roads are aging. Bridges are really getting old. There's collapsing and deteriorating infrastructure. And then on Capitol Hill, former Secretary of Transportation Ray LaHood, who's with the group Building America's Future, what he's saying is that the federal gas tax needs to be raised by 10 cents in the next few years to keep the Highway Trust Fund funded. And then other
other groups like the Chamber of Commerce says, increase it and index it by the rate of inflation.
Okay. The prices have fallen quite sharply. That was a good segue into this next thing I want to talk about regarding fuel prices. And we've watched in the summer, we watched crude oil go from around $100 a barrel to just earlier this month to about $60 a barrel. So, sharp drop. We like it at the pump. Rip, how much do truckers really like it, both on the diesel front, and then when we consider there are some fleets that run gasoline? So, tell us, the impact to fleets.
Lori, there's actually a couple of things that I think we really need to focus on here. From a consumer standpoint, this is fantastic, especially if you've got a car that doesn't get particularly good gas mileage. You're going to have more money in your pocket. I've heard estimates approaching $2,000 more that the average American family could have in its pocket if these prices were to stay down for a year. So that's fantastic. From a trucking standpoint, it's a little bit different. Today we heard earnings from FedEx Corporation, and they talked about jet fuel prices and the fact that, for example, jet fuel prices now are 30% below where they were earlier this year. However, that company, which does both trucking and air and aviation for parcel and package and freight deliveries, has determined that the drop in the jet fuel price is only going to help them by 8 or 10%. That doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface, but their explanation is that their fuel surcharge doesn't follow the actual spot price of fuel. And there is a lag, and that is one reason why there's that gap between the 30% and the 10%.
Well, does that mean they bought in bulk ahead of time at the higher price? Is that what's happening?
That's a part of it. Some fuel purchases are done in advance. There's also fuel hedging that's done. So the long and short of it is that there's obviously going to be a little bit of benefit, but it's not going to be as great, presumably, for the truckers as it is going to be for the American public. The last thing I want to say about that, though, is that obviously if there's a lot more goods being purchased because fuel prices are low, somebody is going to be wanting to move those goods in a truck. So that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, then, Eugene, same thing for the states. There's a tax on oil revenues, and that helps states along the way. Is there anything, oddly, when the price is going down, the tax is going down, and whatever the states want to do, they now seem to have less money to do it with. This comes even as the government is giving them less funding to make road fixes. So how does this play out for the states?
Well, I want to say nearly a decade, many states have been looking at ways to make up a transportation shortfall because the federal gas tax and diesel tax has not been raised in more than 20 years. There's not a lot of aid going to the states to repair their bridges, roads, water supplies. So what they've done is, and what we've seen recently, as recent as this year, a state like New Hampshire, the people there voted the legislature voted and the governor signed into law a gas tax increase, which, we're talking people approving increases in their taxes, which is very, something we don't see every day in American politics. A state like Vermont raised their gas tax last year. In Michigan, the governor and the legislature is looking at ways to either raise the gas tax or also find revenues in other places. And so the funding question for the states is quite urgent. And like you said, given that members of Congress are not taking the action to provide more dollars, to state capitals. And what we can expect in the coming years, in 2015, is, like I said, Michigan, other states, even states that are, oil, rich, we can expect them to, advance provisions around the state capitals that, either raise the gas tax or in Oregon, charge people for the vehicle miles traveled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Rick, one more on this subject, and we have a question that dovetails with it, and it's about what analysts are saying about prices headed into 2015. But let me read our viewer's question. It's from Todd Berger, Director of National Accounts with PACCAR, and he wants to know what the forecast for diesel fuel costs in 2015 will be, and based on crude at less than $60 a barrel, will fleets continue to pursue alternative fuels?
As far as the question of where the fuel prices are going to be next year, we need to revert back to the Karnak the Magnificent. I think nobody is quite sure where we're going to wind up. There seems to be some view that there's going to be a further drop, but fuel prices, if you look back over time, have been extremely volatile. One thing that we need to keep in mind here, from the alternative fuel world, the alternative fuels have been very widely touted as a major benefit for trucking, with gasoline prices staying high. But the benefit is really that the spread between the fuel price and the natural gas price. And again, we're going to have to see how that spread plays out. I can't leave this subject without noting that while there is great optimism about the potential for natural gas to help long-haul truckers in the same way that it's helped refuse companies and city bus lines, there has been only perhaps 1 or possibly 2% market penetration so far.
Okay. Well, we've got one more for you from Dan. Dan says, you've talked about the increase in demand, capacity, driver shortage, and decrease in fuel prices. How do you see that affecting rates for customers?
That's a really good question, and here's the reason why. Traditionally, freight rates have been thought of as a package by the shipper where somehow the fuel surcharge and the underlying rate per mile are somehow rolled into one. The fleets have a similar view of it in that, there's the fuel surcharge component and then there's the base rate component, whether this is a LTL or whether this is a truckload company. Ultimately, if you're the shipper, you're going to want to reduce your costs, and you're going to say, hey, wait a minute, cut my rate because your fuel costs are going down. On the other hand, if you're the carrier, you've got a much tougher issue here, because freight rates now are finally up at a level that's compensatory. It's helping the fleet's ability to pay the drivers more. You'd think the last thing the fleets want is to say, sure, we're going to give you a big break on the rates just because we're paying less for fuel.
Gotcha. All right. I want to stay with you, but I do want to change subject just a little bit and talk about profit outlooks. We've been talking about these savings, especially the potential for them from lower fuel costs. What about the profit outlook for 2015? Does this go back into the bottom line for some of these businesses, or what are analysts saying?
You still got to be Karnak the Magnificent?
This one might be a little bit easier, temporary, at least a little bit. What we've got here is there has been a very solid increase in profits for a number of companies as the rates have gone up, and they would all say that's fantastic. But then we've got a flip side here. People don't always recognize that there are a lot of companies that are, may have to call them have-nots, for lack of a better word. They're the companies where their trucks are old, they can't afford to buy new ones that are more fuel efficient, that will give them the benefits that relate to that. They may have trouble finding drivers. Without being able to control those factors, even if they raise rates, that might not be enough. So it's important not to take a real huge, broad view of this. Certainly for 15, there is an expectation that the well-run fleets are going to have a better year, and rates are going to help. Lower fuel prices can't hurt. More freight because there's more goods being sold, because people have more money in their pocket, can't hurt either.
Okay. That was senior business reporter Rip Watson. Also here is congressional reporter Eugene Malero. They are previewing trucking issues for 2015 on this edition of Transport Topics, live on web. I'm managing editor Lori Grant. You can join the conversation as well. Just email share@ttnews.com or tweet #LiveOnWeb2015, or you can comment directly on this page in the box at the top of the container. Let's talk mergers for a little while, Rip. I want to talk with you a little bit more. It's another angle regarding profits. And for those larger companies you were just talking about that may have a good year, are any of them giving any hint at what they might do with their largesse? Any of them talking about CapEx yet or anything like that that might give us a glimpse as to what it means?
Let's stop right there for a minute. There's probably not too many trucking companies out there. They're going to talk about largesse, because I don't think they think of it that way. I think they think of it as making up for some tough years. I think they probably view things a little bit more like a farmer who's the conventional wisdom here is, if you have one good year in 7, you can stay in business. So hopefully they're going to have more than that. Now, having said that, mergers. Today, or earlier this week actually, FedEx said they were going to buy one of the largest logistics companies in North America called Genco. Earlier this month, or a few weeks ago, we saw C.H. Robinson, the largest freight broker, go out and buy a business called FreightQuote, which has a niche that's well established in logistics. So I think there's no question, if you look back, there are a lot of companies that want to be active in the merger and acquisition world. XPO Logistics is one, Roadrunner Transportation Systems is another. And there's certainly, by any stretch of the imagination, in both truckload and brokerage and logistics in general, of hugely unconcentrated, hugely fragmented business, and as such, there is tremendous opportunity. Companies, if they are richer, are going to be more interested in looking, but as Fred Smith, the CEO and founder of FedEx, said today, they're really going to be looking for the right fit, and they're not going to look to overpay. That's just good, sound business, and that's going to be there not just in 2015, but going forward.
What about in terms of buying equipment? We've seen record pace in both truck orders and truck sales, and just makes me wonder, can that pace continue? Are they talking now, if at all, about whether they'll buy more equipment? What are your analysts, anybody forecasting about orders or sales?
Well, a key thing to remember here is that, and we need to credit American Trucking Association's economist, Bob Costello. He's pointed out recently that all of this surge in business for the manufacturers is replacement. That the number of trucks on the road hasn't really risen. And the question then becomes, next year, if truckers have a little more productivity because of the hours of service turn back, if you will, or step back, maybe that's going to reduce their need for equipment. But if companies have money, ultimately they are going to have to buy. The question is, are they ever going to get to the same level that they were at back in 2006 when the environmental rules changed and there was a huge pre-buy.
Okay, thank you for that. Eugene, along those same lines, with equipment, size and weight issues were a regulatory concern, pretty much unresolved this year.
Yeah.
So is it likely to come up next year in the Congress as well? What's your sense?
There's going to be a push by some of the Western states, transportation advocates and transportation leaders throughout the Western states, Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and they're going to urge leaders on Capitol Hill, to relax, federal provisions on federal regulations on size and weight. But this is an issue that's been going on for a long time, and the trucking industry and the rail industry have been going at it for many years. And again, even though some of the Western states might bring it up, and a group such as the Western States Transportation Alliance, they're going to push for it, it's really unlikely to get traction, see any traction. And even if they manage to get it in a piece of legislation, say the highway bill or a funding bill, again, we're going to have gridlock on Capitol Hill, so, this highway bill might not even, see the light of day. So, but yeah, it'll come up, but like I said, it's this is something that's been going on for many years.
No question.
Any business perspective? Rick?
No question from a business perspective. There are fleets that are going to want to have either larger trucks in the less than truckload business, where there can be 18% more goods carried without increasing the actual weight of the truck. And there will be those who are going to want to increase the weight limit from the current 80,000 pounds on a nationwide level to somewhere 88, 89, or perhaps higher. But as Eugene said, the chances of this getting done are always going to be very small. The railroad industry has been very effective keeping the size and weight nationwide frozen at the 80,000 pound level.
Correct, yeah.
Well, we started out talking about this huge demand in freight, and I'm just wondering, will the industry, are those the types of things that will force the industry to push a little harder to try to get this? Because they've got so much that they have to move. We were talking about freight, we were talking about demand and capacity.
I can't resist. I got to answer this one the way I feel. What goes on in Washington doesn't reflect what happens in the business
That's
world
what I wanted to get at.
more often than not, and probably almost all the time. So whatever the D.C. Folks, the lobbyists, and the members of Congress decide on this issue, there is always going to be a reality that is not caught up or matched up, in the same way.
Okay, all right.
And that's and Congress, historically, critics of Congress say that federal lawmakers are a step or two behind the times. That they're the last ones to come in on big hot button social issues, and in transportation they're no different. There's a lot of technology out there, not that beyond trucking. We're talking electric vehicles and other technology, alternative fuels, and it's the Capitol Hill that critics say has been dragging their feet and slow to arrive at these issues.
All right, great. We're going to talk about more tech issues in a minute, but we have a question from Mike Lohr. And Mike says, what will be the positive and negative effects of the current oil surplus? Which industries will benefit? Which will suffer as they relate to the freight demand? Are there geographic effects? Any?
Rip?
I'm going to try that real quickly. We've talked about some of the effects from the companies. We haven't talked about one really important issue here, which is that the U.S. has done a tremendous job through activities in states like Texas, North Dakota, and elsewhere at developing domestic oil production. No question. That has certainly made the world better off, but there is the issue of, on the side of these companies that have made all these investments may not be so interested in doing them if oil prices are down in the 50 or X number of dollars a barrel level. And we need to remember that a tremendous amount of the economic growth in this past few years has been tied to fracking, whether you that's used for energy exploration, whether you oppose it or you don't, and some people don't like it. The fact is it has definitely been an economic stimulus. Now, when that goes away or goes down because of the lower oil prices, how is that going to affect the country? Well, if Karnak was here, he could answer that. I can't.
And neither can I. You want to give it a crack?
I just second what, Rip says, and, it's just the uncertainty is still looming,
Sure.
And it's kind of like you have to just wait and see what's going to happen.
Okay, fair enough. We've got another one from Brad Larson, Logistics Manager at Weingard for RIP. What is your opinion on the effects of dimensional LTL pricing versus the standard NMFC pricing? Now, when we talk about technology in a bit, we can get into that, or we can move to it now. You ready?
Let's talk briefly about dimensioners. The trucking industry in the less than truckload sector has been wedded to something called the classification system, the National Motor Freight Classification System, for decades. It was around in textbooks when I was in graduate school back in the 1890s, and practically before that as well, perhaps. But what's happened is the use of new technology that will essentially weigh and measure a shipment by using an overhead beam, kind of like a laser, essentially. That will ultimately, from the company standpoint, perhaps help them, because there is some feeling that shippers don't always tell the total truth about what's in their shipments. Now the companies can get that information and price it appropriately. The other fact that's going on here is that the motor freight classification, it can be a costly process no matter how good you are at doing it. So some people think that it will simplify the pricing process and perhaps help the companies do that at a lower price in order to move their goods. So there are some potential benefits there, just like there is from technology throughout the industry.
Great. Well, that's a good segue, because Eugene, I wanted to know about a lot of the technological change that is headed the industry's way, is regulated as well via the government. So tell me, what are some of the new tech-related regulations coming along?
Something that is not yet on regulation. It's just that, if we look at technology in the future, we might eventually see trucks that drive themselves. Daimler has proposed, trucks that can operate by remote control. But when we talk about regulation, pretty much the main one are what a lot of people know, the electronic logging devices. And that is, these machines inside, the trucks to record the hours that a driver has been on the road. And from FMCSA, we're expecting guidelines and a rule on this. And the agency had said they had until September 30th for publication of this rule. However, the omnibus bill that was signed into law last night, there is language in this bill, which is law now, requiring the agency to release their rule on electronic logging devices by June 1st of 2015.
Well, Eugene, you got to remember something here, though. This is the government, as a rule, doesn't always meet these deadlines.
Oh, yeah.
This has happened.
No.
In fact, it's probably unusual that they do.
And in the I was just going to say, in the omnibus law that was signed last night, it says that FMCSA has to meet this June 1st deadline, but there's no penalty for it. And typically when...
so what does that mean? If they miss it, they miss it?
If they miss it, you can have somebody representing FMCSA say, hey, we're behind schedule.
Okay.
And you can have lawmakers call them up on Capitol Hill and they'll explain themselves.
Does it-
One other little facet of this we have to touch on. This electronic logging device is something that is very much disliked by a lot of truckers. They feel like it's intrusive,
Yes.
it's an invasion of privacy, and there have been lawsuits that have stopped this in its tracks before. One last thing I want to mention real quickly about this. There are many fleets that use these devices that they really like them, and they think this helps to keep their drivers safe and keeps them compliant with the hours of service rule. They're very eager to have everybody else live by the same rules that they are, because they feel like there are some folks out there who will cheat and drive quite a bit beyond the allowable hours.
Okay, but are there any other electronic devices out there, telematics or anything like that, designed to either, to help the driver in any way, anything on that front, business-wise?
Well, there's no question there's a huge world of technology, and I hope another webinar gets into that, because there is all sorts of collision avoidance technology. There's technology that theoretically could keep drivers more alert. There's technology that will give them constant feedback on how well they're doing in terms of fuel economy, how well they're doing in terms of hard braking. There's a whole world out there. Speaking of technology, one other thing. Sorry to drag it on a little.
No. We're listening.
There is, in addition to the autonomous vehicles that Eugene was talking about, there's also, there was a very highly publicized and extremely clever piece of marketing by Amazon a year ago when they trotted out a drone to deliver packages. At some point, we're going to see something like that there, perhaps, and perhaps very soon. There's a lot of feeling that that would be a very efficient way to deliver goods.
Okay. Well, kind of, not exactly on the tech front, but another one.
And then technology. There's also a lot of people know there's devices that will notify drivers about availability for parkings when they're on their routes. And the parking issue when truckers are on the road working has been a constant
Do
problem.
those things require regulation, or are those are things that are being developed that
no,
just
I
help
think,
the industry in general?
Yeah, I think there's just helpful tools, and that they're more at the state level. Some of them, so like state DOTs notify drivers.
Well, I've got another question, state level, if we can answer it, if we know. This one is coming from Dan. What do you see happening with the CARB compliance procedures in California, and do you think it will spread out to other states? This is essentially an EPA regulating carbon emissions, correct? Do we know whether other states, any other states have something like this in mind? Do we know?
I believe some of the states in the Northeast are considering this language, but it's premature. California is very progressive on this issue, so they've really gone ahead. But pretty much, there's some state lawmakers, are enthusiastic about cutting emissions, but we haven't seen such a big momentum around the country.
Well, California and its smog problem and
Correct,
clean air,
yeah.
its initiatives behind clean air, I'm sure drive it for California.
Yeah, let's look at this from a little bit different angle. In California in 2006, the Los Angeles and Long Beach, the two largest ports, put in a requirement that the truckers who use those ports use newer trucks, and without getting too far into it, there was a very difficult issue relating to employee mandates that was delayed some of this, but the bottom line is that the effort by those ports to force cleaner air, truckers in those locations is something that is happening elsewhere. Now, do you believe that California leads the nation? California would say that, and I think some other folks would. But this, at least in the local port trucking world, it has taken quite a few years to move from the Clean Air Plan in Southern California to the rest of the country.
Okay, okay. I've got one more, Rip, I think it's for you. It's from our viewer, Fleet Zoo. Do you think trucking companies will adopt more planning and optimization technologies in 2015 to cope with the industry challenges and improve their bottom line?
I think there's no question that there has been tremendous interest in any sort of optimization and any sort of transportation management tools. Companies, now that they have some more money, could choose to spend it there. I think there has been some companies that have done a tremendous amount in that area. I also would just point out, again, we've got the road forking here, and some companies just don't have the money to make that kind of an investment, and those that don't could fall behind.
Okay, all right. Eugene, I want to flip back to something on the government front and talk about nominees in the spending bill and all of the toing and froing to try to get cleared. Harry Reid was quite savvy there. So I want to know, Senator Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, a Democrat, he pushed through key executive branch nominations. They seemed to be stalled. The president had put them forward, a while ago. Which of these nominees are important to trucking, or to transportation in general?
Yeah, right now the big name, and he was confirmed last night, is Mark Ruskine. He was most recently a member of the board member of the National Transportation Safety Board, and now he was confirmed by the Senate to be administrator of the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, and that agency has oversight of some of trucking provisions on efficiency, and also with the logistics on size and how they operate, in respect to, like safety conditions. So Ruskine, he's a big player, and and then the big one that we're waiting for, and so far, is the FMCSA. We don't have a permanent director at FMCSA, and now, so we have no indication from the White House as to who's going to be the nominee to take over the agency permanently. Acting Administrator Scott Darling, he's obviously has to be on the short list of potential candidates, but a lot of people on the inside in the trucking industry, transportation world, and sources on Capitol Hill, they're not hearing a lot about who the administration is going to nominate or when to take over FMCSA, and that's something that we'll see in the next year. And politically, the White House has to nominate somebody who can get the support of Chairman John Thune over at the Senate Commerce Committee, get a lot of support from Republicans, and somebody who doesn't have, lack of a better term, a red flag that on a hot button issue that a senator might object to, and this could not be transportation related. It could be immigration or other stuff. So TBD on a FMCSA nominee.
Well, let me ask you this, though, about the FMCSA. When you've had, or maybe it applies in general, is this person's going to be the shoe-in to run the agency?
Yeah.
Is that not, are we wrong to think that way when it comes to government agencies?
Yes.
That someone could run it and the president just nominates somebody totally different to do this?
I don't want to say oftentimes, but it is very common for the administration to, if an agency head is stepped down due to controversy or because they were retiring anyway, for the administration to put somebody in an interim basis, acting capacity, and that person is not their ideal candidate. They just want somebody to, run the ship till they get somebody in the, down the pine. So what politically, what we saw and what a lot of people were thinking is that the Obama administration waited to see what happened after the midterms, waited to see if the Senate's still going to be Democrat, and that presumably will influence his decision. If the Democrats stayed in control of the Senate, maybe he would have nominated somebody else, and now that the Republicans are in charge, he may go with somebody, like I said, who will get support from Senator John Thune and others.
Okay, all right. Well, we're going to check just to see whether we've got any more questions from our viewers, and you're still welcome to send us any questions your way. Send us questions our way.
Rip, have you heard who might take over FMCSA?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
All right. Well, seems like we will have to leave it there for now then. I'm Lori Grant, Managing Editor of Transport Topics. It was my pleasure to host our final edition of Live on Web. Thanks to my colleagues, Senior Business Reporter Rip Watson and Congressional Reporter Eugene Mulero, our production team, Kevin Eaton, Brandon Green, Tara McClellan, Shihab Mustafa, Jacqueline O'Laughlin, Joseph Terry, and Digital Media Editor Gary Kaczynski. And of course, thank you for watching and participating. For more information or to follow Live on Web, please go to liveonweb.ttnews.com.